Hello, my name is Jason Demore, and welcome back to By Faith Bible Studies. This is our third video on Song of Songs and our final video on Song of Songs. It's been a wonderful journey going through Song of Songs over this week and the last 2 weeks, and I hope it's been enlightening to you as it has been to me to study this sort of forsaken book, this book that really isn't studied much in the Bible, but really has some important messages about marriage. And that if we can understand marriage rightly, then we can counter when the world gives us a false interpretation of what love is. But before we jump into our video today, we have to get a little recap of what we've looked at so far. 2 weeks ago, we saw that Song of Songs is a literal romantic poem between Solomon and the Shulamite, his first wife. It's a literal romantic poem, it is not an allegory. And then last week, we saw that Song of Songs is a depiction of marital love, and marriage is a symbol, not an allegory for, but a symbol for Christ's love for the church. And because of this reality, this twofold reality, that the Song of Songs, which is seen as the greatest song in the entire Bible, is about romance, is about marriage, and marriage is used all throughout the Bible as a symbol for God's love for the church, we must take marriage very seriously, and marriage should be highly esteemed. And our society does not do this, and that is why we must counter it and counter the world's interpretations of love with the Song of Songs. 2 weeks ago, we were in the premarital love section of Song of Songs, where the lovers were preparing for marriage and dwelling in purity. Then last week, we were dwelling in the marriage section, and now here in our next section, which I'm going to be going through chapters 5 all the way through chapter 8, it's a longer section, but this section is everything that happens post-marriage. What happens after they are married? What happens after they make those vows until death do us part? What is marriage like, the marital lifestyle? And because of that, this is the hardest section for me to study for two reasons. First of all, there are verses in here that have so much confusion over what they mean that scholars argue and can't fully understand. And honestly, I don't think anyone will ever know exactly what it means because of the lack of cultural connection, the new time that we are in, and so forth. Some of these idioms and these messages don't connect because of the poetic style of Song of Songs. But secondly, I have a lack of experience in this area especially. I have never been married, as I mentioned, and there are things in this text that speak about things that happen in marriage that I can't really address very well. And for that reason, I'm going to be skipping chapter 7. Chapter 7 speaks about a romance that is to be dealt with reverence and secrecy and honor and beauty. And yes, it is in the Bible on purpose, but as I read the passages, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to read out loud chapters 5 and chapter 6. Then I'm going to read chapter 7 silently to myself, and I'd encourage you to do the same. The reason I'm doing this is because the entire Bible is to be read. However, there are certain texts, and I think chapter 7 is a perfect example of this, that are to be dealt with a certain respect and reverence. And I would also argue it's not really a text that I can study in this format today. Then I will be reading out loud chapter 8. Let me read Song of Songs, chapter 5 through chapter 8. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh along with my balsam. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. Eat, friends, drink and imbibe deeply, O lovers, and this is where we ended last week. I was asleep, but my heart was awake. A voice, my beloved, was knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is drenched with dew, my locks with the damp of the night. I have taken off my dress, how can I put it on again? I have washed my feet, how can I dirty them again? My beloved extended his hand through the opening, and my feelings were aroused for him. I arose to open to my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, and my fingers with liquid myrrh. On the handles of the bolt I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and had gone. My heart went out to him as he spoke. I searched for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer me. The watchmen who make the rounds in the city found me. They struck me and wounded me. The guardsmen of the walls took away my shawl from me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved as to what you will tell him, for I am lovesick. What kind of beloved is your beloved, O most beautiful among women? What kind of beloved is your beloved that thus you adjure us? My beloved is dazzling and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is like gold, pure gold. His locks are like clusters of dates and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves beside streams of water, bathed in milk and reposed in their setting. His cheeks are like a bed of balsam, banks of sweet-scented herbs. His lips are lilies dripping with liquid myrrh. His hands are rods of gold set with beryl. His abdomen is carved ivory inlaid with sapphires. His legs are pillars of alabaster set on pedestals of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. His mouth is full of sweetness, and he is wholly desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Where has your beloved gone, O most beautiful among women? Where has your beloved turned, that we may seek him with you? My beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of balsam, to pasture his flock in the gardens and gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine, he who pastures his flock among the lilies. You are as beautiful as Tirzah, my darling, as lovely as Jerusalem, as awesome as an army with banners. Turn your eyes away from me, for they have confused me. Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost her young. Your temples are like a slice of a pomegranate behind your veil. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and maidens without number, but my dove, my perfect one, is unique. She is her mother's only daughter. She is the pure child of the one who bore her. The maidens saw her and called her blessed, the queens and the concubines also, and they praised her, saying, Who is this that grows like the dawn, as beautiful as the full moon, as pure as the sun, as awesome as an army with banners? I went down to the orchard of nut trees to see the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded or the pomegranates had bloomed. Before I was aware, my soul set me over the chariots of my noble people. Come back, O Shulamite, come back, that we may gaze at you. Why should you gaze at the Shulamite as at the dance of the two companies? And then I'm going to stop here and I'm going to read chapter 7 silently to myself, and I encourage you to do the same. I finished reading chapter 7. If you're still reading, stop the video and continue, but now I'm going to read chapter 8. Oh, that you were like a brother to me who nursed at my mother's breasts. If I found you outdoors, I would kiss you. No one would despise me either. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother who used to instruct me. I would give you spiced wine to drink from the juice of my pomegranates. Let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. I wanted you to swear, O daughters of Jerusalem. I want you to swear, O daughters of Jerusalem. Do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Beneath the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she was in labor and gave you birth. Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of Yah. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. We have a little sister, and she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for? If she is a wall, we will build on her a battlement of silver, but if she is a door, we will barricade her with planks of cedar. I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers. Then I became in his eyes as one who finds peace. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He entrusted the vineyard to caretakers. Each one was to bring 1,000 shekels of silver for its fruit. My very own vineyard is at my disposal. The 1,000 shekels are for you, Solomon, and 200 are for those who take care of its fruit. O you who sit in the gardens, my companions are listening for your voice. Let me hear it. Hurry, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices. This is the words of Solomon to his lover, the Shulamite, his first wife. But really, this is the inspired word of God, the song of songs, the song of romance. And over this, let us pray before we begin. Dear Lord, I pray that we would look at this in reverence and in purity, Lord, but also that as I look forward to marriage, as I am not married yet, Lord, that I would prepare myself for this adventure, for this next chapter that will come in my future. Let us prepare for it in honor, in respect, and in glory to you and you alone. Amen. The National Center for Family and Marriage Research did a study around the year 2011, and it said that from 1970 to 2011, the marriage rate in the USA had dropped by 60%. That is only about 40 years, and over those 40 years, the marriage rate dropped 60%. Another research was done by OECD Family Database, and they said that the US was the 6th highest divorce rate of all countries. There are many countries in the world, and the US has the 6th highest divorce rate. Well, what is that in numbers? Well, the US has a 40 to 50% divorce rate of those who are married. Marriages are low, and if they happen, they are quick to fall apart. This is our world. This is the place we live in. And why is that? I would argue that the reason that marriages are low and divorce rates are high is because those who are married do not understand what marriage is all about. They don't understand the essence of marriage, and the essence of marriage, as we talked about last week, is that it is the love between two people, the uniting of two flesh to become one, and also a symbol of Christ's love for the church. Christ is at the center. God is at the center. It is God honoring. That is what marriage is about. And when you have a marriage like that, there are joys that the world cannot understand. Let me explain. When we talked about premarital love, this premarital romance that happens before they are married, the world can have a slight taste of that. Although they scar it and scorn it with premarital sex and throw aside purity, which is its own beauty in its own way, and so really they can't enjoy the totality of it, but they can have a slight taste. But then we come to the marriage, and that was last week, and once again the world can understand that a little bit. There are beautiful weddings. There are even beautiful weddings between people who are of the same sex, even though that is not even marriage as God defines it. The world can have a little taste, a little, almost a common grace from God in this way. But what we are looking at this week, chapters 5 through chapter 8, addresses marriage prolonged. The unsaved couple, the secular couple, can say until death do us part. But the Christian couple, the ones who put God as the center, will actually live as a married couple, God honoring, until death do them part. They are not of the 40 to 50% who lead to divorce. And they are not of the group who decide to not get married at all, but sacrilege the marriage bed and throw marriage aside. The world has a small taste, but they do not understand what we are about to look at today. There are glories in chapters 5 through 8 that the world has no understanding of, because those glories are rested in ideas of forgiveness and godly love. If you have not been forgiven, how can you understand how to forgive? If you have not been loved with God's love, how can you understand how to love undyingly? If Jesus has not said to you, I will never separate my love from you, how can you say to someone else, until death do us part? To me, it seems impossible, a contradiction. Well, let us jump into these chapters and let us learn these essences of marriage after the wedding. What is marriage defined by? Well, the first one in chapter 5 is the imperfections of marriage. The imperfections of marriage. And this song of songs, this beautiful poem, this gorgeous text that is layered with beauty and perfection and figurative language, is in a sense scarred by chapter 5. Because chapter 5 goes poorly. It doesn't go well. The lover and the loved are split apart. There is anger, there is confusion, there is a problem, there is pain, there is hardship, there is imperfections. The point of Song of Songs is to say that yes, this is a perfect marriage, but it's a perfect marriage between a man and a woman who are both human and thus are both fallen, and thus there are imperfections in that marriage, because no one is perfect. No marriage is perfect, and this marriage is no different. The Song of Songs, this beautiful poem, chooses to stop here in chapter 5 and say, yes, this marriage is flawed. This marriage is imperfect, but it is still God honoring. So what is the problem? Well, 2 through 5 tell us what this first fight is, this first argument, this first issue between Solomon and the Shulamite. And this first fight goes like this. The Shulamite says, I'm asleep, but my heart was awake. It's unclear if you put asleep and awake in the same sentence. You confuse the reader. I'm going to be honest as to what is going on. Is she asleep? Is she awake? Is this a dream? Honestly, I don't think it matters, and this is why. I would argue that the entire book of Song of Songs is a literal poem. However, I would argue that it is not literally talking about every single detail of their marriage, because it's a song. There's details left out and there's figurative details added in, but really the whole thing purveys how their actual literal relationship was. And so it really does not matter if she was awake or asleep in this essence, because what we're about to see symbolizes that first fight. Or maybe it literally was their first fight. Either or. The first fight, she said she's asleep, but she was awake, and it seems she's in bed, and a voice, it's her beloved, is knocking. Solomon is knocking on the door, and Solomon wants her to open the door. For some reason, at this point, they're separated, and there's a door in between, and Solomon wants to come in. She then says in verse 3, I have taken off my dress, how can I put it on again? I have washed my feet, how can I dirty them again? She is in the sleep mood. She's probably wearing a nightgown of some sort, and she doesn't want to dirty herself by getting up and opening the door. And so she stays in bed. And so Solomon, in response to this, leaves. She then gets up later and tries to open the door, but he has left. It says here in verse 6, I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and had gone. She gives a sort of silly excuse and does not open the door, and so Solomon leaves. But what's really going on here? Well, if you look at the text and you look at the sort of underlying theme, it has something to do with physical intimacy. Solomon wants to be with the Shulamite in physical love, and she, for a silly reason, says no. And so he leaves. There is a problem in their marriage, and it has to do with sexual intimacy. Now, this is something, a marital question about sexual intimacy is so outside of my expertise, I wish not to study it for very long. But I do want to turn back to 1 Corinthians, and I've read this text many times before, but I'm going to read it again because it's so important and really connects with what we're looking at here. 1 Corinthians 7, verses 2 through 5. But because of immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another, except by agreement for a time, so you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. It's an interesting verse, and what the verse really is saying is there is a place for sexual intimacy in marriage. And there is a place where you have to give yourself up to your spouse, and your spouse will have to give themselves up to you. And without getting into more details of this, I do want to remind you of something I said last week, is that I would argue that sexual intimacy in marriage is a symbol in itself, a gift in itself, but also a symbol. That the entirety of a married life is of one flesh. The entirety, every act of that married life is love that should be united. So I think Solomon is doing two things here. First of all, he is addressing the theme of sexual intimacy and how to address that in marriage, and that there will be times when the woman is supposed to give herself to the man, and the man is to give himself to the woman, even if they don't want to in that sense, but they choose to love each other anyways, and not to give these silly excuses. But he's going deeper and saying this. This is a symbol of any problem in love. Any issue in marriage, any struggle in that union, whatever it may be, from something silly to something serious, from something like unloading the dishwasher to sexual intimacy. I think he is making that connection. I think we can make that connection. That those are the two things going on here. But regardless, there is an issue in their marriage. There is a division between their love of one another. And it's a problem, and the Shulamite realizes this. And this brings us to the Shulamite's regret. She opens to my beloved in verse 6, but her beloved Solomon has gone away. And her heart goes out to him, and she searches for him, but she does not find him. He calls for him, but he does not answer him. She realizes she has done wrong, and she goes and opens the door. And then she goes and searches for him in the streets. And in the streets, in verse 7, we see she finds the watchmen. And the watchmen treat her like a harlot and beat her and strike her and wound her. Now this reminds me immediately of the chapter 3, verses 1 through 5 dream that happens where she is looking forward to their marriage, looking forward to sexual intimacy, and now in a sense their marriage has gone awry. This is the realities of marriage. It's a little unclear why this particular act of she being treated like a harlot, if that's figurative language or not, speaking about something else, it's unclear. But the point is this: there is a scar in their marriage, and that really is envisioned in verse 7, where the bride, the beautiful bride, is beaten, struck, and wounded. There is hardship, there is pain in their marriage. There is a problem. And there is a problem because they have not chosen to love each other, to give themselves up to the other, and the other to give themselves up to his or her spouse. And she regrets this, and she realizes this, and she says this: I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, as to what you will tell him, for I am lovesick. I love him, but I cannot have him, because I have done wrong, and he has left me. And I would argue that Solomon leaving her in this sense would also be a wrong. They're both in a wrong in their own way, whatever the struggle exactly is, and there's a problem in their marriage. Imperfections. But that imperfection does not destroy their marriage. In fact, she still loves him. It says here in verse 9, the daughters of Jerusalem say to the Shulamite, what kind of beloved is your beloved, O most beautiful among women? What kind of beloved is your beloved that thus you adjure us? And she responds in 10 through 16 by, in a sense, repeating what was said to her in chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. The beautiful speech of Solomon to the Shulamite is now the beautiful speech of the Shulamite to Solomon. And she describes how beautiful Solomon is in her eyes. She loves him. Every part of him, every imperfection, every good thing, and every problem. She loves him for who he is. She loves him. And you notice here that as she describes him, instead of describing her as Solomon did to her, as gentle and sweet, and as the woman, there is undertones of a realization of the man's place in the marriage. He is seen as strong, as a protector, as the man in the marriage. His hands are rods of gold. His abdomen is carved ivory inlaid with sapphires. His legs are pillars of alabaster set on pedestals of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon. What part of Lebanon? Choice as the cedars. And as we remember, those are symbols of strength and beauty. He is strong. He is the protector. He is holy, desirable. She says, "This is my beloved and this is my friend. Through good times, through bad times, we will hold together." Now, if this was a secular marriage in many instances, this would be the end of their marriage. This would be it. The divorce papers would be signed just a week after the marriage papers. It would lead into nothingness or something worse, of struggles in the marriage that lead to hatred and pain and more pain. But something is different here. There isn't divorce, there isn't domestic violence. No, there's something different. There is forgiveness, and that brings us to chapter 6. This is a chapter of forgiveness. Now, taken out of context, forgiveness would not be noted here, because the words forgiveness are not mentioned, and however, there is a reuniting, and that reuniting with chapter 5 in context shows us that this is a chapter of forgiveness. Verses 1 through 3, we see the Shulamite wants Solomon back. The daughters of Jerusalem say, "Where has your beloved gone, O most beautiful among women? Where has your beloved turned, that we may seek him with you?" And she says, "My beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of balsam, to the pasture his flock, in the garden and gather lilies." Now, I think that this verse can have two interpretations. Literally, that he's off in his garden. That he's in a little garden, and she sees that he is in a little garden, and she wants to go down and meet him. But I think there's a figurative meaning as well. And that figurative meaning is that she wants him to return to his garden, which is herself. Look at the next verse. "I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine, he who pastures his flock among the lilies." She is the vineyard, the garden. And I think the literal and figurative are both true. And we'll get back to both of these. She has a longing for him to return to her garden. But she is literally off in a garden. And I think by using both of these, Solomon uses a poetic style of this parallelism that is quite beautiful. This then leads us to 4 through 10, where Solomon speaks. And Solomon does not say, "Why did you not open the door?" Solomon does not say, "I cannot forgive you." Solomon does not say anything like that. He says this. His first words are, "You are as beautiful as Tirzah, my darling, as lovely as Jerusalem, as awesome as an army with banners. Turn your eyes away from me, for they have confused me." This is saying something such as her eyes are so beautiful that he is overwhelmed by her beauty, and so he feels that she must turn away. He loves her. And then something fascinating happens here. At the end of verse 5, you'll notice something. "Your hair is like a flock of goats that have descended from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes which have come up from their washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost her young. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranate behind your veil." This is exactly the same as chapter 4, verses 1b through 3. It's their wedding vows. He repeats their wedding vows. It is beautiful and majestic that he chooses in this moment to remind her. That covenant that we made until death do us part, I remember it, and I will fulfill it, and I will never leave you. because I love you, and I still think you're beautiful, and I still want to be with you. But note here something that's very interesting. Tom Patton pointed this out, and I think this is fascinating. There are parts of her body that are cut out of this repetition of the marriage vows. The neck is not mentioned, the lips are not mentioned, and the breasts are not mentioned. And the reason they're not mentioned is that's not the reason that he mentions this. That's not the reason he says this. It has nothing to do with sensuality. His point here is to remind her of the marriage covenant, and the marriage covenant of undying love, even when sensuality is removed. Their marriage will go on. Something that's also interesting is that in chapter 7, those other parts of chapter 4 are actually mentioned and are quoted. Where in chapter 7, he speaks about the lips and the neck and the breasts when they get to the more sensual element, but that's after the forgiveness. Let the forgiveness come first. And the forgiveness has to do with remembering the wedding vows. Remember the wedding vows. Remember that covenant we made between each other in the face of God, and let us hold true to that covenant. Then we come to verse 8 through 10, where he speaks about other women, and some people, as I've talked about before, think that he's talking about his other wives. That's absolutely not true, because if you look at the context, it's clear what he's saying. He's saying other women think you're beautiful too. Other women think you are wonderful. And they say things like, you grow like the dawn, as beautiful as the full moon, as pure as the sun, as awesome as an army with banners. They love you too. And your mother saw you as a pure child, the first of her and only child, the one your mother loves you, other women love you, I love you. You are beautiful. This is true forgiveness because it's forgiveness founded in so much love. When do we think of forgiveness in this way? We must do it more often. We must look at forgiveness as always tinted in love. Love for one another. Then we come to verses 11 through 13. And 11 through 13 are considered the most controversial verses of all of Song of Songs. I'm going to give you my interpretation, and really my interpretation only, because there's just so many interpretations. It would waste our time to look at all of them. But I want you to understand that whatever I'm saying here just may not be true. But it is the interpretation that I have based on looking at other commentaries, looking at Tom Patton's sermons, and so forth. I'd argue that verse 11 is spoken by the Shulamite, that she is saying, I went down to the orchard of nut trees to see the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vine had budded or the pomegranates had bloomed. And I think that's literally saying, first of all, that she wants to go down to the garden to find Solomon. Remember earlier in verse 2 that Solomon was in a garden, and literally she wants to go down to the garden and find her. But also, figuratively, I think she's looking forward to that springtime again. Notice the use of budded and bloomed and blossoming. Doesn't that remind you of chapter 2, where Solomon said, the fig tree has ripened its figs and the vines in blossom have given forth their fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. Just like Solomon is remembering the marriage vows, I would argue that she is remembering the engagement. That she's remembering the betrothal and what it meant. She too is dwelling on that marriage covenant. And she is saying, yes, Solomon, I too will hold true to the marriage covenant. I too will not forget this. I too forgive you. Whatever struggle, whatever hardship, I will hold fast to you, because that is a covenant and it is not to be broken. Then we come to verse 12, and I'd argue that's also spoken by the Shulamite. And I have really no idea what it means. Before I was aware, my soul set me over the chariots of my noble people. But looking at the diction and the connotation of the words, I would argue it has something to do with an idiom of the time that is saying that she feels good. She feels wonderful. One commentary said that her heart or her soul is skipping as fast as the chariots. That might be it. I don't know. But the point is that she is feeling good. She is in love with Solomon, and Solomon is in love with her. Then we come to verse 13, and 13, I'd argue, is spoken by the daughters of Jerusalem. Come back, O Shulamite. It's that word that I've been mentioning every week, and now we actually come to the iterants of that word. It's only mentioned twice in the entire book of Song of Songs, here in verse 13. Some people think that Shulamite is a place where this woman lives. That might be true. But I think a better connection is to note that Shulamite has the essence of the word shalom. And Solomon's name has also the root shalom. They are connected. They are a counterpart of one another. They are one flesh. They are married, and they love each other. And so for some reason, the daughters of Jerusalem want to see the Shulamite's beauty. They see this love, and they want to see her. They say, come back, that we may gaze at you. And then the Shulamite speaks, and she says, why should you gaze at the Shulamite at the dance of the two companies? Or another interpretation is the dance of Mahanaim. The two companies, or Mahanaim, comes from a story in Genesis 32, verses 1 through 2. I'm not going to turn there. It's unnecessary. Basically what happens is Jacob sees some angels. The angels come to Jacob, and he names the place Mahanaim. And so what is the dance of Mahanaim? Well, it's unclear. But I would argue that because of the angels in that place, that there must have been two angels, because it says two companies, that over time in culture, in the city of Mahanaim, a dance was developed. This dance could have been a marital dance, a holy dance, a war dance. It's unclear, but it's clearly something that is not to be watched. It is something to be treated with reverence, and the daughters of Jerusalem are not to watch it. It is only between the dancers, just like you wouldn't watch angels dancing, in a sense. And that's why I would argue that it's a marital dance. Some sort of traditional marital dance that is not to be watched, and it is only for the bride and the bridegroom. And it's unclear what this dance actually is about, or what is in the dance, but something is clear, that I would argue that the dance, it's a dance. It's a literal dance. And that means that their forgiveness, once again, is not marked by sensuality. It's not marked by sexual intimacy. It is marked by forgiveness. The sensuality and the sexual intimacy comes later, but first is the dance. First, there is this cultural custom that symbolizes their forgiveness, whatever it may be. It is to note that their forgiveness comes before they are to be loving one another again. Love is so much deeper, so much vaster, so much more wonderful than an act. It is something like a dance of life, of love, of marriage that goes on and on all throughout this married couple's life. And so here in chapter 7, we have this dance. And I'm going to skip this chapter, but basically, chapter 7 through chapter 8, we see the last article of marriage. We saw that marriage is imperfect. We saw that marriage is defined by forgiveness. And here in 7 and 8, we see that marriage is defined by undying love. Love that never ends. Chapter 7, they dance, they talk about their love for one another, and they take part in the gifts of marital love. Really, the reason we're skipping this chapter is because I feel like the daughters of Jerusalem. Why should you gaze at the Shulamite as at the dance of the two companies? This is not for something for me to gaze at until marriage comes. And so read the chapter, understand the chapter, look forward to the chapter, but don't feel it's something to be studied, something to be read and see that it is beautiful, that marriage is beautiful, yes, but not really something to be studied. This brings us to chapter 8. Chapter 8 is really the end of the chapter, and there are some themes that come back up, and it's such an important chapter, and there's a lot going on here, but I think it's so important. Verses 1 through 2. Oh, that you were like a brother to me who nursed at my mother's breast. If I found you outdoors, I would kiss you. No one would despise me either. I would lead you and bring you into the house of my mother, who used to instruct me. I would give you spiced wine to drink from the juice of my pomegranates. This is another really weird verse, and it has something to do with family and a familial custom that in Jewish society the brother could kiss the sister, but the lover could not kiss the loved because maybe she would be seen as a harlot. It's unclear exactly what's going on. And it kind of seems weird in our society, but it has something to do with in marriage almost becomes familial love because it is so undying, it is so beautiful. This brings us to verses 3 through 4. And 3 through 4, you'll notice, are very familiar. Because 3 through 4 are the same as chapter 2, verses 6 through 7, with just a small couple words changed. Let his left hand be under my head and his right hand embrace me. This is chapter 2, verse 7. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the fields, that you do not arouse or awaken my love until she pleases. Well, as when we looked at chapter 2, we saw that this was a call for sexual purity. Well, where does that place here? Well, let me remind you, purity has not gone away, because purity has to do with contamination. This is an understanding that purity remains. It is a chorus of the necessity for purity. I'd also argue it's a remembrance of past times, of past loves that continue on into the future of their marriage. And another commentary said this, and I think it's interesting. I don't know if I fully agree with it, but I'm going to note it anyways. Is that after you read chapter 7, you go, this is amazing, I want this. And I think this can be argued as a warning not to embark on marriage too early. And I think that's further enhanced by the fact that chapters like chapter 7 and chapter 6, which really talk about the deepness of their love, come after the imperfections and the forgiveness. They come after the hard times and this truth that the hardness of marriage leads to the goodness of marriage, that there is more love after forgiveness. And if you embark on marriage too early, you may not be ready for those hard times. You may not be ready for those struggles. Don't skip to chapter 7. You need chapter 5 and chapter 6 first. Take purity seriously. And understand that marriage is an adventure that maybe you're not ready for. It may be saying that. I don't know if that's exactly what it's saying. Then we come to chapter 5, verse A, and it starts to explain another reason maybe why this verse is here. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning our beloved beneath the apple tree? I awakened you. And we see that, yes, it is calling back to past times. That definitely is one of the main reasons. Because Solomon is saying, I awakened you. I was the one who awakened that love. I was the one who aroused that love, and now we love one another. They're, in a sense, remembering good old times of their love when they were younger, and this love that is still booming now. And then in 5b, marriage becomes this familial thing again, and it's a weird phrase, and if you said this to your lover today, you'd probably be sleeping on the couch. But it says, there your mother was in labor with you, there she was in labor and gave you birth. It's a weird phrase, but once again, it connects this idea that marriage almost becomes familial because the love is so strong, the love is so beautiful, and so undying. And this brings us to verses 6 through 7, some of the greatest verses in all of Song of Songs. Put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death, jealousy is as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of Yah, which is shorthand for Yahweh. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, he would be utterly despised. Put me like a seal over your heart to protect or remember. But more so, it is this truth that love is as strong as death. It is so powerful because it is founded in God. What I think is fascinating is what part of God? It's so close to his anger, and I would say these flames of Yah are his passion. God has a passionate love. He is jealous for himself. Though I believe this is speaking about wrong jealousy, God is jealous for himself, but it could be speaking about right jealousy. You should be jealous for your own love, holding on to your own love tightly as Yahweh holds on to the very flames of fire of his loving passion. Love is strong. Love comes from a passionate God. Love is as strong as death. The most fearsome thing, the most formidable thing to the one who does not know God is death. And this love is as strong as that. But it goes further to say that God, who is even greater than death, God who is more powerful than death, love is like that, the very flame of Yah. This is a powerful love, and it cannot be quenched by any waters, by any hardship, by any perfections, because forgiveness always flows afterwards. If it is love founded in God, love founded in passion for fulfilling God's commands, love for God leads to love for others. Love for God leads to a good marriage. This is the fiery flame of Yahweh. And the waters of this world cannot quench it. Rivers cannot overflow it. Man's riches cannot buy it. Solomon did not buy the Shulamite in that way. Solomon bought the Shulamite not with his riches, but with his undying love. This is what marriage should be. That imperfections lead to forgiveness, and forgiveness leads to greater love, and greater love then falls into sin, and there is imperfections, and it leads to forgiveness, and forgiveness leads to greater love. Because it is love founded in God and understanding that He forgives, and so we ought to forgive too. Love that understands that God has defeated death, and so we can love as strong as death, and love that is like flashes of fire, flashes of Yahweh. We must be passionate with love. We must fight for love. We must understand that love is lovely and wonderful and godly. This love is a love our world does not understand. A love that they have no conception of. No understanding of. They don't want a seal over your heart, a seal on your arm. They throw marriages aside so quickly. Love to them is not as strong as death, and jealousy, pagan, worldly jealousy is stronger. And the flashes of fire, the flashes of Yah are not present. And waters quench their love, and money buys their love, and they do not understand this love that is so much better, because this love is divine. And that really ends Song of Songs. And what follows is sort of a recounting of what happened in this book, a recounting of the story from another light. And I think it's a beautiful recounting. It's from the Shulamite's voice, and it's sort of a recollection of something her brothers said to her. Her brothers said to her, "We have a little sister, and she has no breast." The brothers are saying this. "What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for? If she is a wall, we will build on her a battlement of silver. But if she is a door, we will barricade her with planks of cedar." Basically, before the Shulamite was ready for marriage, when she was younger, the brothers cared for her. And it gives us a new light to what we saw in chapter 1. Back in chapter 1, going all the way to the beginning of the book, we saw that the Shulamite says, "My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me caretaker of the vineyards." Well, for some reason, that was an act of, in a sense, their kindness, because they wanted to protect her. They wanted to protect her from dangerous men. A door would be sort of this open door to any romance really becoming a harlot. And they were afraid of that. But she responds to this remembrance, and she says this, "I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers. Then I became in his eyes one who finds peace." When she grew, she found peace, and she found that peace in Solomon. And it continues, and she gives this analogy. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He entrusted the vineyards to caretakers. Each one was to bring 1,000 shekels of silver for its fruit. Solomon owns a literal vineyard, and he cares for that vineyard. And then she responds, and she says this, "My very own vineyard, my body is at my disposal. The 1,000 shekels are for you, Solomon, and 200 are for those who take care of its fruit." And I argue those 200 that take care of its fruit are for his brothers and for the rest of her family who cared for her and protected her until marriage was the right time, who taught her about love, who taught her about marriage, who made sure that Solomon was the right one, who cared for her and protected her. But at the right time, she left her family. She left her mother and father and came to Solomon and became one flesh. And so in this dying note of Song of Songs, she gives this thank you. That this love is a beautiful one, and she is thankful to those who prepared her, thankful to those in her past, and thankful to those who tried to protect her. Because she was protected, she lived in purity before marriage, and in marriage she is still pure with Solomon and Solomon alone. It's a beautiful marriage. And then we end with these beautiful love words, really just lovely nothings in a sense of their love for one another. It seems like we're in another place, another time, where Solomon says, "Oh, you who sit in the gardens, my companions are listening for your voice. Let me hear it. I want to hear you sing." And she responds, "Hurry, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices." Come to me, Solomon. They want to be with each other. They love each other. It's also a callback back to chapter 2, verse 9, where she uses similar diction. They love each other. They want to be with each other. And that is how the Song of Songs ends. It's a beautiful book. And really, I think what it teaches us is what godly love is all about. I want to turn to a couple scriptures in the New Testament that show us other texts about marriage, and they say very, very similar things. The first one I'll turn to is Mark 10. Mark 10, Jesus is speaking about marriage, and note what he says. "But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother, and the two shall become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one flesh." And then read this. He was talking about divorce earlier, and this is how he responds. And he says, "What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate." This is how marriage endures. If there is a realization that God is at the center of that marriage. 1 Corinthians 13, the great love chapter that speaks about love over and over again, ends with this in verse 8 after speaking about all the great things of love, and it says, "Love never fails." Why does it never fail? Because it's founded in God's love. It's founded in the good things of God. 2 Corinthians 6, 14 through 18 tells us once again this idea. Here he's telling people to not be unequally yoked. It could be talking about other relationships beside marriage, but marriage most specifically says, "Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship is light with darkness? Or what harmony is Christ with Belial? Or what is a believer in common with an unbeliever? Or what agreement is the temple of God with idols? For we are the temples of the living God, just as God said." Now hear this. "I will dwell in them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from their midst and be separate, says the Lord. And do not touch what is unclean, and I will welcome you, and I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty." The reason that secular marriages fail is because God is not there. The reason that Christian marriages fight on is because God is there, and he dwells in the heart in the believer, and he dwells in that marriage through that marriage, and he cares for them as if they are his daughters and his sons, because they are. And another one, we turn over to 1 John. 1 John 4:19 says this. 1 John 4:19, "We love because he first loved us. If someone says, 'I love God,' and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, that the one who loves God should love his brother also." Relationships are founded in God. If it is a good, godly relationship, then God is at the center. God is the one who is being honored, and God is being the one who is glorified. And because of that, the imperfections of marriage lead to forgiveness, and forgiveness leads to greater love. And this brings us to the end of Song of Songs, but it also leads us to a realization of who Solomon was. We read Proverbs and we read the great wisdom of Solomon, and we realize he fell short. And the same is true with the book of Song of Songs. He wrote the Song of Songs. He knew what beautiful romance was. He had a beautiful marriage with this first woman. He wrote this song, and then it wasn't enough, and he wanted more. He, in a sense, is an example of the secular marriages of our society. He wanted more. And marriage after marriage after marriage, and I don't think any of those marriages gave him the same joy that this first marriage gave him. Because there were no other songs like this. that Solomon wrote. No other beautiful accounts of this love. Solomon wanted more, and Solomon lost it all. Solomon did not take marriage seriously for the rest of his life. And after 700 wives and 300 concubines, he had scarred marriage to the utmost extent. He had stained Song of Songs. It was disgusting and grotesque. That's not what marriage is supposed to be. This is what marriage is supposed to be. And I think Solomon's dual life, in a sense, teaches us this. This is the right marriage. This is God-honoring marriage. And the rest of Solomon's life is not God-honoring marriage at all. And that marriage destroyed him. I know we've read it many times, but let me turn for a moment to that passage. 1 Kings chapter 11. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughters of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the sons of Israel, You shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon held fast to these in love, a love that was not godly love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to Yahweh his God, as the heart of his David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh and did not follow Yahweh fully, as David his father had done. And Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now Yahweh was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned away from Yahweh, the God of Israel. And here, the fires of Yah, not the fires of his loving passion, but of his angry passion, burns against Solomon because Solomon did not love in the right way. What does this teach us? It teaches us to not emulate Solomon, but to emulate Christ and Christ's love for the church in marriage. Do you notice that as the great Proverbs are written and as the great Song of Songs is written by this super wise man, that God makes sure that these people's stains are revealed so that we may not worship them? Do not look to Solomon for marriage advice in that way. Song of Songs gives great beauty here, but there is a love that is greater, and that is Christ's love for the church. That is, in a sense, the marriage that we should emulate. And that we should understand that imperfections would represent, in a sense, the church's imperfections, that Christ forgives those imperfections, and he loves us, and it causes us to love him more when he forgives us. And Solomon too was forgiven, as we see in Ecclesiastes. But still, understand this: Solomon is not the one to be gloried for his love or for his proverbs. It is Yahweh. It is his passionate love that gave the church to Christ as Christ's bride. That Christ would die on the cross in love for the church, for the church's imperfections, and so that the church may love Christ more. And as a symbol for that, may God be the center of our relationships, and especially of marriage. May God be the center of those relationships, so that those relationships, marriage, may be a symbol of Christ's love for the church, so that the world may see how good Christ is, how loving he is, that he loves like flashes of fire. He loves like the very flames of Yah, and no water can quench his love. No money can buy his love, for his love is divine. Thank you, and I'll see you next week.